Hey yo, and welcome to How Would You Build, a little series in which I take your favorite characters from fiction, fantasy, and all forms of media and attempt to build them as lore accurate as possible in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. In this series, we'll be using all source books from Wizards of the Coast except the 2024 revision of the Player's Handbook. If you have any suggestions for characters you'd like me to make sure to drop them in the comments, join the Discord to post an official request on the DnD channel, or you can ask me directly on my coffee. Additionally, the full character build written down with backstory suggestions will also be available there, along with all the other ones. In this episode, we will be building the worst curse user in Jujutsu history, Suguru Geto. This build will contain spoilers for much of Hidden Inventory and Jujutsu Kaisen 0. So if you haven't watched those, I thoroughly recommend that you go through them. But if you don't care about these spoilers, then we will try our best to build this incredibly powerful summoner as close as possible to the show. This means that we want a character who is able to hold himself in melee, capable of powerful, rapid martial arts, and has the ability to subdue spirits to help him in combat. Additionally, we also want the ability to conjure spirits out of nowhere, and we want to conjure multiples of them, not just one, as the game usually allows. Finally, we also want a character who has a little bit of everything, who is both wise, intelligent, and charismatic. Not completely, but at least to some measure. We now begin with Geto's ability scores. For this, we will generate them using the standard array. Firstly, we're going to put a 15 in dexterity. Geto displays acrobatic maneuvers, proficiency in martial arts, specifically karate, and speedy reflexes. Next is intelligence for our mastermind. His plans lacked conventional practical knowledge, but they were outlandishly good in terms of preparation and theoretical outcomes. Geto also manages to think on the fly and overwhelm his enemies, using formulated hypotheses that do come true more often than not. We then put a 13 in wisdom and a 12 in charisma respectively, mainly for multi-classing purposes, but also because Geto has tried to engage in philosophy and is described as handsome in the show on a couple of occasions. He does lack tact, and his attempts to persuade people are kind of obvious, but nevertheless he is a character with at least a measure of acumen. He does very much become smug in his later years and doesn't always make the most reasonable decisions, but he makes up for it with his sheer tactical intellect. Finally, we dump constitution and strength. While Geto is decently strong enough to be able to carry Riko Aminai, a small teenager, during their escape, and does get beat up severely by a few sturdy hits from Yuta, he does also tend to let his summons do the fighting and then engage in it himself, keeping his concentration on those summons safe from ever being checked in the first place. We will also supplement this lack of HP very early on and all throughout the build, so don't worry about your survival. For Geto's race, the choice will be obvious and pretty simple. He is a variant human. This is going to grant us an ability score increase in dexterity and charisma, making our charisma 13 for multiclassing purposes, and our dexterity 16 to survive the earlier levels a little bit better. We also obtain a bonus proficiency in acrobatics, and we will take our bonus feat to be tough to gain 2 extra hit points per total level of our character. Geto is an exceptional human being, and he was raised without the privilege of family, money, or power, unlike his best friend Gojo. Additionally, his curse manipulation technique requires a strong stomach, and certainly does not lead to a pretty life. In addition, unlike many Shikigami users, Geto is incredibly sturdy and relies on physical power along with the summoned curse spirits to defeat most opponents, either through brutal melee or through a combination of the spirits, power, and himself. For Geto's background, this will also be a simple one. We will get the Haunted one from Van Haitian's Guide to Ravenloft. This grants us skill proficiencies in Arcana and Investigation, and the languages of Abyssal and Infernal. For our equipment, we obtain a Monster Hunter's pack with all tools one might need to start off on their Cursed Spirit Exorcism journey. Additionally, we get common clothes, which represent the standard Jujutsu Tech uniform, along with a trinket of special significance. This can maybe be a picture of his time with his best friend before the higher-ups separated their unbreakable bond for their selfish reasons, or maybe another trinket that you find fits the character. Lastly, we get 1 silver piece. This represents a tiny amount of money to spend while Geto bounces between job to job in an endless cycle of exorcism and consumption, while he eventually cements his special grade rank. For his feature, we get Heart of Darkness. Geto has faced unimaginable horror, and while his life was already difficult with the revolting ritual of taking control of cursed spirits, after the events with Totri, he truly began to change. The Mimiko and Hanako situation representing a true descent into irredeemable, willing, and conscious evil. Most settings won't allow for a truly evil character murdering innocents, so depending on whether or not the Mimiko and Hanako situation happened, feel free to take your version of Geto into another, less genocide-y path. Nevertheless, people feel taken by Geto's situation and the difficulties that he goes through to the point where he does build a cult. So this feature will help you garner the sympathy of commoners and some Jujutsu sorcerers. For Geto's levels, we begin with a small disclaimer. This build requires a lot of money and expensive spell components to work. Ask your DM if it's okay to give you those components to achieve your summoner build. If your DM is stingy with accepting these conditions and giving you rewards that you will eventually use to subdue curses, then make sure that you take some levels into College of Creation Bar to ignore most of the small costs and eventually the bigger ones. But as long as you agree with your DM on how the build will work in practice with concessions on both parties, you should be good to follow through with your version of Geto. Now let's actually get onto the levels. The first level we will take is into Warlock. This grants us proficiency in simple weapons and proficiency into light armor. For saving throws, we get proficiency in wisdom and charisma to at least have a somewhat steely mind as we face the horrors of our job. And for skills, we will take history and religion to eventually be able to pose as a Buddhist priest. For the equipment, we begin with a light crossbow and 20 bolts. This is our starting form of damage. For now, our version of Geto has no curse spirits to manipulate, so we rely on curse tools to get them weak. If your setting is particularly grueling for level 1, make sure you use the full range of this mighty weapon. After this, we get a component pouch. Since Geto doesn't visibly use anything to summon his cursed spirits, we can simply use this for mechanical purposes. Then we have a Dungeoneer's pack, representing the essentials for fighting curses at the start of a sorcerer's time, along with leather armor, a quarterstaff, which will be a weaker playful cloud, and 2 daggers to add nicely to Geto's early level survivability. Eventually though, his true weapons will be a nearly endless stream of cursed spirits that he can unleash. At first level of Warlock, we get Pact Magic. This means that we have a single first level spell slot that recharges on a short rest. This represents Geto already having a solid grasp of Jujutsu at an earlier life. This will be my interpretation of his great mastery over Jujutsu. This minor spellcraft allows Geto to showcase simple feats of cursed power and obtain weaker curses that will eventually be assimilated into the first Warlock spells we get. For the Warlock subclass, we will get the Genie. The whole reason why we went Warlock was to get access to this extra dimensional space this subclass grants us. This allows us to put Glyphs of Warding with the summoning spells inside of them. When we break the vessel, after saying the name that will trigger the Glyph of Warding containing the summoning spell, the summons come tumbling out, and we effectively have more creatures summoned immediately. Flavor this as Geto clenching his fist and calling out the name of a cursed spirit or two, and then as an action summoning them both into the battlefield. To keep this friendly with most stables, this once per short rest limitation on breaking and reshaping a vessel allows for extra summoning without slowing down combat too often. Bottled Respite is the specific feature for this. We can disappear into an extra dimensional space to rest, place down Glyphs of Warding, and store items for safekeeping later down the line. We will use this extra dimensional space to mimic Geto's summoning ability in the following way. Since you can hear out of your vessel, it's safe to assume sound reaches inside of it. So Glyphs of Warding placed inside of it can be triggered. There are other ways of triggering them, of course, so if you find one, use it and be creative. We first enter the vessel, place down a glyph, with the trigger being the name of a specific entity that we will flavor our summon as. When the time comes, we summon the creature by speaking their name as the trigger, and finally, we break the vessel to expel these creatures as a once per short rest costly summon ability. Make sure that you talk to your DM about limiting how many summons you can have inside your vessel's large space, so you do not bog down combat or trivialize an important boss fight. My personal suggestion would be to allow keeping a proficiency number of glyphs with summons inside the vessel as an arbitrary limit. Make sure to use these summons if your party is reaching the total party kill territory, or if you're having particular difficulty with the boss and would like an additional boost to your party's power. The second feature we get is Genie's Wrath. We get a strong bit of bludgeoning damage since we choose Dao, and this will allow us to complement our martial arts very nicely, along with adding a little bit of extra heft behind our blows at these earlier levels. Geto does hit his opponents very hard with his fists, so this allows for one big hefty punch. For spellcasting, we have a single slot of first level, and first we obtain the cantrips Eldritch Blast and Mage Hand. Eldritch Blast represents the little squid curse spirits that Geto uses as projectiles by shooting them with his finger held like a gun. They are incredibly inaccurate, but they can damage curse spirits already, whereas Mage Hand is forcing a weaker spirit to handle something for Geto, as this can very much be within the ability of his technique. For spells, we get Armor of Agathis and Hex. Armor of Agathis allows Geto to prepare a set of curses to use as fodder against plenty of attacks. Their death can even deal damage depending on how much cursed energy was put behind the specific curse that was just exercised. This is the flavor we use for upcasting Armor of Agathis. Hex is a welcome addition as well, weakening curses to make them closer and closer to being assimilated. This will be flavored as imbuing cursed energy into a weapon, our hand-to-hand combat, or our trusty light crossbow if we decide to use them. For our second level, we multi-class again into Monk. This time we get proficiency in short swords, and we get unarmored defense. This essentially means that Geto is always wearing leather armor, thanks to his martial proficiency. That same martial proficiency also gives him martial arts. This was the entire reason why we took the Monk dip, because Geto has insane martial skills, and with a little bit of extra damage from the bludgeoning from the Warlock dip, we can truly have a sturdy melee combatant in terms of damage, along with being able to wield the 3-section staff, Playful Cloud, with dexterity. This will be flavored as a fancy quarterstaff, since the PHB recommends reflavoring clubs as nunchucks, and a 3-section staff is just a large club, essentially. At level 3, we get our final multi-class, and our main level. We will take a first level into Wizard. This will grant us Arcane Recovery, which lets us recover spell slots on a short rest. This will complement our buffing routine on the short rest very nicely for the adventuring day. For the spell book, we keep a thorough record of our cursed spirits that we have available down to the last digit. We will reflavor the ability of copy spells as taming lower ranked spirits after their defeat and incorporating them as our newly acquired spells. Ask your DM to periodically provide you with weakened spirits or spirits to weaken, so that when you defeat them, you get a new spell functionally working the same as a scroll, except only you can understand its meaning. To obtain the spell represented by the weakened spirit, you need gold and time for the materials and ritual to fully assimilate it, essentially functioning like the normal feature with a little bit of fun flavor. For spellcasting, we get a slew of spells at first level of Wizard. We begin with cantrips. We take Mind Sliver to represent a disorienting, cursed spirit that Geto uses to cause hallucinations or maybe even a little bit of fear to spring into his opponent. The second cantrip we get is Firebolt, and then Dancing Lights. Firebolt is a minor manifestation of the Forest Fire Curse spirit, throwing an ember of blue magical flame at a point and igniting objects or people. And Dancing Lights will be flavored as the small will-o-wisps from Japanese mythos, since those are very popular. For spells, we obtain Absorb Elements, Alarm, Find Familiar, Mage Armor, Magic Missile, and Shield. Absorb Elements, Shield, and Mage Armor represent the mixed use of employing fodder and momentary summons of spirits to take the brunt of damage. For Geto, Alarm, on the other hand, will be using spirits to kind of keep a watch or keep a lookout on an area and ward it off, only to produce a loud scream the moment something crosses it. Whereas Find Familiar will be another spirit with a little bit more freedom and either flight, swimming, climbing, or burrowing to scout ahead, spy, or get a view on an area. Make sure to have it report back to you, since Geto could not share senses with the spirits, unlike Mei Mei with her crows. Finally, Magic Missile is a swarm of highly accurate and bloodthirsty cockroach curse spirits. This will represent the minor form of Kurorushi, which will be used for damage and develop even further with our spell slots. At level 4, we obtain a second level of Wizard. This grants us the School of Divination. Geto is incredibly able to plan things out and is often called a mastermind. This subclass is going to allow us to predict our enemies' movements and force them to fail important saving throws for our benefit. First feature is Divination Savant. This makes it easy to obtain new ways of spying, surveilling, and exploring areas by using a variety of cursed spirits. Suguru Geto is the worst curse user alive, not just from power, but also very much because of his machinations. He is a mastermind who lays down plans to see his vision to the end. This only gets worse with Pseudo Geto later on. Make sure you focus on gathering these reconnaissance spells to ensure greater versatility when scouting a new area. The second feature is Portent. Give your opponents or allies a predetermined role. You get 2 of these. This feature allows Geto to seize particular moments of weakness in his opponent, or give allies a bit of momentary help with a spirit at the right time. With preparation and forethought, Geto's plans work very well, as long as they're not disturbed by unforeseen developments, such as a death-binding vow. Later on, this will guarantee we secure a spirit to our control. For spells at this level, we obtain another slot of first level, and we will get the spell Silvery Barbs and Unseen Servant. Silvery Barbs is a small stroke of luck. foresight or otherwise preparation, the enemy lands a crit. Passes a save? Well, a small spirit takes the blow and unbalances them for one of your allies, or maybe distracts an opponent just long enough to be blasted away by your best friend. Unseen Servant is another minor spirit. Nothing too exciting, but it allows Geto to be a little lazy when at home and move things normally out of reach for Mage Hand. At level 5, we obtain our 3rd level of Wizard, and this grants us cantrip formulas. If you need a specific damage type, sift through specific minor spirits at your disposal just wandering around in the wild, and add one to your readily available arsenal of weak reliable spirits. At this level, we get 2nd level spells, and an additional slot of 1st level, and 2 more slots of 2nd level. We will get Earth and Grasp, which will be used like the Pink Fungus Kissing Curse, if that's how you call it, restraining our opponents and squeezing them with the added flavor of a spirit desperate for a big ol' smooch. Phantasmal Force will be the 2nd spell. It is highly versatile. As far as I know, this spell can be used to mimic the Ground Catfish Curse, making your opponents hallucinate that they are falling, taking minor damage, but mostly slowing their advance on Geto as he monologues on and on. Other curses could also be reproduced by this illusion, so feel free to create new unseen illusions using your wonderful creativity. At level 6, we obtain a 4th level of Wizard. We shall increase our intelligence by 2 points and start preparing 2 additional spells and a cantrip at this level. First off, for cantrips we get Prestidigitation. This allows Geto to use his weaker spirits for a slew of effects and all sorts of shenanigans, gaining a measure of versatility over his control. And for spells we get Featherfall and See Invisibility. Featherfall allows Geto to slow down his fall using buildings, curse spirits, and other forms of manifestations to pull him up or bounce him around. See Invisibility is another auxiliary skill of Jujutsu sorcerers. Geto can see in the ethereal plane and invisible creatures. This allows us to follow those pesky spirits, to exorcise them and assimilate them. At level 7, we obtain a 5th level of Wizard, and this grants us 3rd level spell slots. At this level, it's important to begin actively looking for scrolls or weakened spirits for the spell Counterspell, as it will allow Geto to eventually survive Inumaki's cursed speech pretty easily. We, on the other hand, will focus on the Curse Spirit Manipulation by obtaining 2 costly spells for summoning allies and enclosing them in our little extra-dimensional space. Glyph of Warding allows us to store summons and conjure spells inside our genie's vessel, effectively conjuring additional spirits by speaking their name and breaking it without concentration being needed. Personally, I feel this is a balanced combo since it takes money, spell slots, and a vessel that can only be used once per short rest, an all or nothing kind of summoning. Summon Fae can be used to summon a weaker but possibly recovering version of Tamamo no Mai Incarnate, with the Merfolk version of the spell. Since we don't know their abilities, I will assume that they are a likeness to their folklore counterpart. Since foxes are known to be deceivers and charmers who steal life force, a mirthful Fae covering a smiling mask, almost in an act of fake shyness, works incredibly well. Charm your foes and resolve combat however you see fit, now that their guard is down. At 8th level, we obtain our 6th level of Wizard, and this grants us Expert Divination. We can now throw See Invisibility on the whole party at reduced cost and in a pinch. Geto's Curse Energy Manipulation is growing stronger and allows for employing only the minimum of power needed to keep a Cursed Spirit scouting. For spells at this level, we obtain Summon Lesser Demons and Fly, along with an extra slot of 3rd level. Summon Lesser Demons is unwieldy, but it allows us to summon a lot of the minor spirits we see Geto bring in the show. The Centipede Swarm will be reflavored as Dretches, the smaller Cursed Spirits, and 2 one-eyed small spirits as Abyssal Wretches and Maw Demons respectively. Keep in mind that once thrown, these small fiends go berserk, so keep them well away from your party to distract and hopefully damage your foes. Fly also becomes our little manta ray spirit Geto uses to fly away with Rico during hidden inventory. At level 9, we obtain a 7th level of Wizard. This grants us the spells Summon Greater Demon and Mordenkainen's Private Sanctum. Summon Greater Demon will be our summoning powerhouse for this level, since we cannot effectively upcast Summon Fate to store away just yet. Specifically, this spell allows us to summon the Giant Cyclops Curse as a Barlgura. Do note as well, if you stop concentrating on this spell before losing control of the Greater Demon, the demon simply vanishes, as the spell is worded in a way that explicits only uncontrolled demons stay for longer after concentration is broken. So if you need a quick bonk and later down the line a powerful spell cast from a strong cursed spirit, just cast the spell and stop concentrating as soon as you can. If you want greater versatility, the Dybbuk has an at-will dimension door and the Babao has an at-will dispel magic. These demons can easily be flavored to represent cursed spirits you have fought before, or will be assumed to have fought during your downtime. Mordenkainen's Private Sanctum is a momentary, small veil dropped on a location. It forbids planar travel and can be hidden from view by the outside. This will be a very useful spell when binding spirits or wanting your war crimes to be kept away. At 10th level, we obtain an 8th level of Wizard. This grants us an increase of +2 to our intelligence, which means higher DC, and so less of a chance to escape for our little cursed spirits. For spells, we obtain 2 slots of 4th level, and we get these spells. Fabric Fabricate, and Summon Aberration. Summon Aberration allows for summoning the Pillars of Light curse that Yuta and Inumaki fought as a Beholderkin, and maybe even Akuro o Otake as a Slad, if we assume they are more of a physical curse and less of a poison, fire, and weather manipulation one, like the legends associated with the two names of Akuro imply. Tamamo no Mae Incarnate could also be represented by a Star Spawn if we want a more directly damaging version. The psychic damage will be flavored as leeching the life away from her foes by her sheer manipulative presence. Fabricate also allows us to create the items we need for these spells, provided we have the technical expertise if needed. This spell will be more for mechanical purposes and making our life a little bit easier without having to rely too much on our dungeon master. This spell specifically lets us bunch up a bunch of gems that we have acquired from our adventuring into one single big 1000 gold jewel that we can use for a spell we are just about to get. At level 11, we get a 9th level of wizard, and this is where our build comes together perfectly. For spells, we get Magic Circle and Planar Binding. We finally have Geto's signature ability, Curse Spirit Manipulation, with Planar Binding. Normally, this spell requires a creature to be stuck in a 4th level or a higher magic circle, which we just obtained, and unable to escape from it. As long as it doesn't have ranged attacks or other ways to damage you, you can spend an hour binding it to your will. The other way is to see if a particular monster is immune to the unconscious condition. If it's not, then it can be knocked out non-lethally for 1d4 hours, allowing plenty of time to bind it after weakening it. For now, the duration is 24 hours, but when we upcast this spell, it will become 10 days, a much more acceptable investment of 1000 gold's worth of gems. Worthy of note as well, if we encounter and subdue Mahito, we can keep him under our control, as well as we made Mahito a Fae in our build video. Additionally, for this huge Pelican curse, make sure that you ask a friendly druid to cast you the Conjure Animal spell and summon a Quetzalcoatl for binding. Lastly, we can also get a much closer version of Tamamo no Mae Incarnate, and it is found in the Conjure phase spell in the form of a Dusk Hag. So make sure that you ask your druid friend whenever you get to higher levels to cast you that spell so you can have a friendly grandma in your party. For level 12, we obtain a 10th level of wizard. This grants us another subclass ability called the Third Eye. Being so accustomed to curses and likened to the Buddha has its perks. We can choose to become able to see in the dark, in the ethereal plane, or invisible creatures. We can also decide to be able to understand all writing. Keep this feature in your back pocket and enhance your senses using cursed energy to be able to see something hiding from you. You don't have to use this feature immediately, just activate it until your next rest when you need it. For spells of this level, we obtain the cantrip Minor Illusion and the spells Summon Draconic Spirit and Conjure Elemental. Minor Illusions allows for hallucinations to become cover and creating diversions with nearly ethereal spirits. But now, finally, we obtain the Rainbow Dragon Curse as a summon from Summon Draconic Spirit. Make sure that you grapple your foes with it, fly them up while delivering crippling bites, only to drop them down from several hundred feet up in the air. Conjure Elementals, though, allows us to summon the Worm Curse as an ashen shambling mound and the little adorable 8-legged curse as a giant strider. Most importantly, though, we can now also obtain the fully materialized form of our Forest Fire Curse in the form of a fire elemental made of blue flames. Worthy of note as well, at this point we can summon a Cosme at 5th level using Summon a Greater Demon. Make sure that you bind it and give it a magical weapon to effectively have Kurorushi, the Cockroach Curse. At level 13, we obtain an 11th level of Wizard, which grants us a 6th level spell slot. At this level, we gained the spells Infernal Calling and Mental Prison. Infernal Calling allows us to summon the White Abishe that we will be calling Akuro o Otake. Make sure that you hex them as well in a Glyph of Warning to ensure that you pass the insight check while they're around. But if you prefer an explosive, easier to control demon, Summon Fiend is also a good spell to emulate this mysterious summon if you pick a demon. They are also quite squishy, which I suppose might fit a little bit better. At this level, we obtain one of our most potent curse spirits, Kuchisake Onna, with the Mental Prison spell. Our target is restrained, and as long as they fail their saving throws to escape the onslaught of imaginary slashes, our imaginary vengeful spirit will continue pursuing them to give them a big white smile. If they attack back, move away, or reach out, 10d10 damage without a save won't be a pretty thing to see. You can flavor this spell as your opponent, ending up with a slitted mouth if they perish from it. If such descriptions are allowed at your table, of course. At 14th level, we obtain a 12th level of Wizard. At this point, you can either bump your Constitution or take a feat of your choice. Alert could also work, for example, but I will take a +2 to Constitution. After all, we don't want to immediately perish before our time at the hands of a teenager, do we? We also obtain 2 additional spells at this level, Disintegrate and Tensor's Transformation. Disintegrate represents maximum output Uzumaki, leaving not a single speck of our opponent behind at the cost of our highest spell slot. Since Kuchisake Onna is powerful but her rank is unknown, using a 6th level spell slot for Uzumaki makes sense in terms of expanding a powerful spirit to use it. Tensor's Transformation, on the other end, allows Geto to go all out, fighting in hand-to-hand combat, his blows coming with heavy power by adding 2d12 force damage, as well as that proficiency bonus damage from our warlock level. This is what allows Geto to fight hand-to-hand combat with Yuta and Maki to an extreme degree. At 15th level, we get a 13th level of Wizard. At this point, we get a slot of 7th level, and we obtain the spells Mirage, Arcane, and Reverse Gravity. Are we still Geto? Nobody knows. Except a certain best friend, or was he really a friend? Mirage Arcane will let us set a wide barrier in an area, effectively making it look the same from a long distance away so as to not arouse suspicion. Reverse Gravity is a little parting gift from the Itadoris. At this level, feel free to orchestrate how your real self might have been taken over by a sinister presence. Maybe your personality is the same, or maybe it's all a lie. At level 16, we obtain a 14th level of Wizard. This grants us greater portents. You get to roll an additional portent dice. Aid your allies, obliterate your foes, or perhaps just let things play out to see how the chaos will bring you a little bit of enjoyment. After all, your plan will succeed when you want it to. At this level, we obtain 2 additional spells. Banishment lets Suguru Geto momentarily summon the special grade Divine Spirit Ganesha to remove an obstacle and straight up banish our foes away from us. Scrying allows for advanced spying on a character we know. Perhaps Suguru Geto wants to spy on his sons by proxy. At level 17, we obtain a 15th level of Wizard. This grants us 8th level spell slots, and along with those come the spells Demiplane and Abidalzim's Horrid Wilting. Uzumaki's AoE form, a huge blast of necrotic damage, kills all life in its way. That is the Horrid Wilting spell. The Demiplane spell, on the other end, allows Suguru Geto to store spirits for a later time. If you feel a fight is going to be long, cast your Demiplane and have your planar binding affected allies step out to help you as you call out for their names. At level 18, we obtain a 16th level of Wizard. I will bump Constitution again, but feel free to take a feat of your choice. And we get 2 additional spells at this level. We firstly obtain Contagion and then Control Weather. Contagion is a touch spell, meaning that our familiar can take on a likeness of the smallpox curse and deliver a crippling disease to a foe we choose. And Control Weather allows us to emulate some of the effects that Wakuro Otake could have produced. This is mainly inspired by the great demon Otakemaru's ability to manipulate the weather. You could also take some fire spells later on, like Incendiary Cloud, to mimic such abilities. At 19th level, we get a 17th level of Wizard. At this point, we obtain 9th level spell slots, and with these come the spell Wish and the spell Gate. At long last, we obtain the ultimate form of subjugation. Using the Wish spell, we can copy a spell of 8th level or lower without paying its cost, and making the casting time an action. So we can now cast Planar Binding at 8th level without using expensive components to bind a planar being for 180 days. If they do not have legendary resistances and you possess a portent to make them fail, a fight with an extraplanar being that has just been made a little bit more vulnerable simply ends right then and there. If you want access to another summoning spell, Wish also allows you to cast it. In your spare time, you can bind terribly powerful smallpox gods and other minor godlike beings by summoning with Gate and going through your binding ritual. Later down the line, feel free to use this spell to summon your friendly, bound, godlike extraplanars to fight your battles for you. At 20th level, we get an 18th level of Wizard. At this point, we obtain Spell Mastery. This is going to allow us to master the Shield spell and the Phantasmal Force spell to increase our survivability and to also use more imaginary curses to cause hallucinations to our opponents. In terms of spells, we obtain an additional slot at 5th level, and we will get the spells Gas and Finger of Death. Gas lets Suguru Geto form binding vows with all manners of sorcerers, and if they don't agree with those, they take massive psychic damage. Finger of Death also concludes our build with a guaranteed damage Uzumaki for when you really, positively need an opponent to be finished off. Now for pros and cons. With the pros, we begin with the ability to be able to get into melee combat and deliver powerful, empowered martial blows. This comes along with very powerful summoning from many curses, some of which bestow incredibly powerful spells like Power Word Stun on the more powerful demons. We also have a once per short rest reinforcement of spirits and imaginary curses that we have stored into our vessel only to break. Additionally, we are also able to subjugate knocked out curses and extraplanar entities and eventually immediately subjugate them with no hopes of success from foes without legendary resistances or a high enough saving throw to resist it. This allows us to build an army of extraplanar allies that we've bound and forced to remain into our service. For cons, we have lower hit points, our constitution isn't very good, and we don't even have proficiency in constitution saving throws, which makes our concentration checks extremely fragile, a character prone to be one-shot by our Tochi build. Additionally, we also have no dispel or counter-spell magic, so we are vulnerable to spells if we don't add these two to our spellbook. And lastly, this version of Geto is incredibly money hungry, so that explains why Geto, in the end, tried to start up a cult. And that's it for this episode of How Would You Build, focusing on Suguru Geto, the worst curse user from Jujutsu Kaisen. I hope that you all enjoyed and that you agree with me on some of these build decisions. If you have different opinions, or if you prefer to build Geto, say, as a druid, or maybe even a bard, focusing on more animalistic summoning, or perhaps summoning Fae, instead of all the other summoning options I have brought you, then you can certainly do that as well. Feel free to drop your suggestions in the comments, maybe do a little subscribble if you want to see more of this, because that is probably the best way to tell me that you want to see more of my lore accurate builds. And I want to thank particularly Aiden and Marshtool306, otherwise known as Elevator, for supporting me on Coffee. I cannot thank you all enough, so I will keep thanking you in every video I make, because your support means a heck of a lot to me. I hope you're enjoying the build PDFs that are coming steadily, and feel free to hit me up on Coffee. But for now, I'll be seeing you all very, very soon, be it here on the Discord or maybe even on the Coffee, for more little lore accurate D&D builds. Be well. Bye-bye.